Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. Remember to let her into your heart. Then you can start to make it better.
All right, so tonight we have a special guest. He was here last time we met, and this is going to be the month of Nick, right? October. That's going to be Nick is just going to run the show for the entire month, as long as he doesn't have to put out any fires and things of that nature, right? So today we were talking about a product called OpenBullet, and we were hitting around the last time. So I know you guys are go-getters, so you probably did some homework on understanding what OpenBullet actually does. So Nick is going to present on OpenBullet tonight. The course over this month, we're going to nudge him also to tell his origin story as well. Okay. So what I'm going to do, Nick is the presenter. Yep. So Nick, the show is all yours.
So hello everyone. I'm going to turn this, I've given this talk quite a few times already now. So I think what I want to do this go around to is open it up to. So if you guys have questions, just interrupt. You know, I'm probably not going to see. I don't know if you guys have hand raising on the Cisco thing, so just shout out, unmute, just shout out if you have questions. This particular presentation, I'm going to kind of take you through what OpenBullet actually is and kind of what it's used for. I know in the past, I can tell you that I kind of grew up doing the, oh, hacking is cool, and then I got stuck to Backbox and then Backtrack, and then I figured out how to play with WEP and then kind of expanded from there. But the one thing I found as I grew in my career and my education is I realized that I lacked a lot of the stuff in the front of what's the point of these tools. I wanted to spend some time, going over that part of it too. So I'm going to go through a little bit of my background. So currently right now I do work at Ulta Beauty in the IT risk management space. We have quite a few teams within there. My particular team, I actually work in what's called the cyber threat intelligence team. I've been at Ulta as a fully badged actual employee for about, I think 5 years and 1 month or 2 months. I know my anniversary was just up, I think not too far ago. But it's been kind of an interesting wild ride, and Otha brings up an interesting point with me too, because I haven't had the traditional, IT, background, to be very frank. Back 5 or 6 years ago, if you would have talked to Nick, then I would have had a good understanding of, the basics and simple concepts. I didn't even understand what Active Directory was or really networking and routing. So I got very, very, very lucky by coming into Ulta as a consultant. This has actually been my first experience as far as a corporate experience, or I guess I'll even equate it to, I think a better term is an enterprise experience, because you can go through a corporate experience at a smaller place in a smaller shop, and you might be the IT for your entire company of 5. And it might be the worst nightmare that I deal with, because we have processes and protocols and everything else in place, and we actually manage quite a bit of it. So I've actually appreciated how I grew up. So I can tell you that I started as a consultant. So again, I know in talking with Otha, some of you guys are, in college or potentially just coming out of college. Some of you guys are just starting your careers, and some of you guys are seasoned veterans in your guys' spaces. So the one thing I can tell you is that I actually started off as a consultant, believe it or not. And I got lucky to work on what they dubbed the POS project. And I'm going to add the asterisk of from hell, because it was absolutely horrible to go through. Excuse me, meaning we had to replace every single POS system and upgrade everything within, I think, like 3.5 months. And we kept losing people on this project. It was awful. So I kind of got, baptized by fire, which I'm sure a lot of us did. I have no formal training at all. I went to college for biology and chemistry, and I think I ended up with a minor in physics just because of how many courses I took. So my background is not in IT at all. Before this, I worked as a paramedic and fireman. That was my primary, or I shouldn't say my primary. That was kind of like my side gig because I liked working on an ambulance. But other than that, I worked in an outpatient anesthesia care, doing outpatient anesthesia under doctor's orders as a paramedic. So I can tell you that, you know, wherever you guys are sitting, you're like, well, holy cow, I don't know how I'm going to get to this level. Nick knows a lot. Guess what? I go through the same stuff you do. I have probably a pretty good case of imposter syndrome. If you guys aren't sure of what that is, you should look it up because it's actually very interesting. I can tell you it pushes me to learn more and to do better and be better every single day that I sit in my chair because I don't take it lightly anymore. The stuff that I deal with half the time it's not that it's life or death. Like I've never truly seen an actual like IR, which is incident response, you know, anything along those lines. It's really truly been life or death. It's just been, you know, they trip past the wire or we didn't have the right process in place, but it doesn't happen often. More so the fact I want to encourage you guys too. I'm incredibly open. I pay it forward. I will have my email address at the end of here, and I can give you guys some other contact info if you're interested. But that's kind of how I grew up. Like I said, I started as a consultant. From there, I got lucky enough to stay as a consultant, and then I moved into our distribution centers as their IT support. So I played with kiosks and their, you know, roving units that go all along the, you know, the warehouse to do picking and that kind of stuff. And then I moved to the service desk, and I encourage, if you guys have not gone to a service desk, maybe not you vets that have done there and you've got lucky to stick into, you know, a good solution out of college or a good job out of college, but it's kind of like horrible trial by fire. And I can tell you, I've never been more frustrated with IT in my life than working on a help desk. It's different, and it really does give you a lot of experience all at once. From there, after kind of going through all that stuff, once again, I had a very good mentor, and he was also the gentleman that ran the consultant project that I worked on for the POS system. And he actually ended up moving over from where he sat, which was called retail technology back in the day, which is like a store sysadmin. So they dealt with the store products, store servers, store POS, back office, front office computers, that kind of stuff. So anything in a store, as far as the technology setting, that's what they dealt with. And he was actually going to move to the POS system as a development lead. And they really didn't have a lot of the knowledge base. So once again, I always call it, you know, I dumb lucked my way into a position, but I stuck with it, and I wrote a lot of the protocols and the processes for fixing the POS systems on the help desk, and then I moved over to there. And I think I was there for, I don't know, two and a half years, something like that. And then that's actually when I became an actual badged employee. So I came into Ulta as more of like a sysadmin. I think at this point, and I'll get into a little bit of my IT risk background, but at this point, there's only a few teams I really haven't been in. I haven't been a DV, or, you know, in the DVA team, and I haven't really technically worked as a server admin, like what you would consider in a traditional sense of managing and using VMware, the servers, and putting that stuff up. But I have a lot of that experience, and, you know, coming from the sysadmin side for the stores, and even as IT risk. So from there, I started doing deployments, and then I started messing with POS software. I don't know if any of you guys are developers or if you guys do deployments, but some of the stuff that you get handed from developers, and again, I don't have anything against them. I don't think it's their fault too, because they're under time deadlines, and they, you know, they try and give you the best product they can. But I had to learn how to fix POS software in Java, and I learned all about, you know, JavaScript and how bridge layers work to Oracle software. So once again, got more experience with looking at software and actually exploding and taking apart jar files and EXEs. Not only around that time, I started learning PowerShell from scratch. I got decent, actually, I would say I probably got pretty good with batch scripting, like command prompt and batch scripting. That stuff I got really good with. So once again, more knowledge, right? And then I got lucky enough to see a position open on the IT risk management team under the identity and access management side. And I was lucky enough that they hired me. And I want to tell you that I was woefully underprepared for this position. So it was essentially managing Active Directory and everything under that umbrella, from, you know, group policy, OU management, you know, how do we fix users? And then I thought my PowerShell was good before I came in there. And once again, oh boy, was I wrong. So I learned PowerShell pretty good, and I'm pretty sure I forgot more more of what I knew by now because I just don't use it on a daily basis, but it's just more tools in the toolbox. And I know I heard Otha the last meeting I was in, you kind of kept saying that all on the way, just get more tools in your toolbox. And even though it's a little rusty, it's just like riding a bike. It does come back. And then from there, Ulta went through, I guess you can call it a metamorphosis, but they focused pretty heavily on security. And my little team of 9 that managed this giant organization, as far as security is concerned, exploded to 36. And we separated teams under different umbrellas. So we had like data loss prevention, policy and PCI is another team. Then we had, obviously the IM team, but then we formed what was called the cyber threat intelligence team. And that's kind of what I live in day to day now. And a lot of people always ask, hey, Nick, can you tell me what you do? I can't. I can tell you that I got about 40 different hats and they sit next to my desk and I might put on, 1, 5, 10, 20 of them at a time. Our team is kind of like the end of the line. I'm very fortunate, and I like repeating this because I heard this a while back, but if you're ever in a room and you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And this is the first time in my life, and I can honestly say this in my career, to where I know now I'm in the right room. I work with far more intelligent people than I am, and it's paid off wonders because when I don't know something, I guarantee someone on my team, they'll be able to help me out and get me rowing in the right direction. So if you guys can honestly look back and say it to yourselves now, I would encourage you to find that next room too. But we're all living in the COVID nightmare, and I literally I love this quote: "If you see my kids locked outside today, mind your business. We're having a fire drill." So for all you that are parents and have to homeschool, I definitely feel for you. But I'll open up if you guys have questions. Like I said, if you guys want to interrupt, feel free to interrupt. But I'm going to kind of hop into the the presentation. So this is just an overall agenda. We're going to go through what ATO actually is, kind of what it entails. I'm going to work through some real world threats with you and kind of define how those play into getting to the adversaries that use these, which are, those organized retail crime groups, all the way up until the advanced threat actor, which are the hackers. We'll go through OpenBullet pretty in depth. I didn't plan on showing how to do the installation. I wanted to kind of show you guys, like I said, the background history. And then I was hoping to maybe take another time to really go through and install it and really go through and use it. And then we'll go through a live demonstration, do some takeaways and some Q&A. So I want to ask really quick, if you guys can come off mute, does anyone actually know what ATO is? I know I put the answer right under the big blurring black words, but has anyone ever actually dealt with account takeover or really know what account takeover is? I'll shake the group if you don't talk.
Oh, this class is online, ain't it?
It's 4160. MSC is on top.
Come on, nobody wants to talk? Shame on you. I'm just kidding. So, excuse me, account takeover. And I know I usually give this presentation to, more so the people that deal with this day in and day out. So this is more on the e-commerce side. What we call an account takeover, for lack of a better term, is really a bot attack. So when we talk about bot attacks and we talk about what they're trying to get or harvest, it's really an account that they can use to leverage to do bad things. So when we talk about ATO, it's essentially them using some tool or some breach list and actually going out, compromising that customer-facing account, not necessarily employee internal accounts. Those are totally different and not really considered under the, ATO umbrella. But the reason they do this, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but is obviously to get some type of, whether it's the account, whether they, trade it for money. So there's a lot of ways that they'll actually do this, but really the bottom line right now, there's no human on the planet that can bust through, username and password and dumping these things in manual. If you do that, you could probably get through, I don't know how good your typing is, but maybe 50 or 20 in an hour. So a lot of this stuff, when we talk about ATO, it's almost always synonymous with what we call a botnet or, a bot attack. They very frequently call these bot attacks. And the reason why these two are tied so much together is because we've had a progression over the years of how ATO is actually kicked off. So a lot of ATO starts with basic reconnaissance, and that's just, your basic scraping a site. You can use Dirbuster, Burp, or if you just crawl the site manually, you can map it out too if you don't have those type of skills yet. But what they'll usually end up doing is finding those sites where you can actually find input, and then they leverage those. And for a lot of companies, it actually ends up being the login pages of whatever site they have. So what they'll do is they usually do, and these I completely consider basic attacks, even though if this is the first time you're seeing it, you're probably going to go, holy cow, this is insane. I've never heard of this. This definitely is not basic. In the world I live and breathe in, these are very basic attacks to us because it's like a rinse and repeat all the time. It's the same old thing day in and day out. So we deal with three main ones, but two real similar ones, which are called credential stuffing and then credential cracking. So, and for all you that have not dealt with an enterprise environment or users in general, there's a very good statistic, and this goes worldwide, that 80% of users recycle passwords. So right now, and you guys don't have to admit it, and I can tell you that before coming in my security team, I was guilty of this. I thought I had good password management and good password skills because I would just use something that was like 12 characters long. Well, guess what? I recycled it over every single account and in my work. I'll admit it. I'm sure you guys have done it at some point in your career. I definitely did it. But this is what the attackers know. They know that everybody recycles their passwords. So what happens? You get a giant, breach data dump, whether it's from, some recent medical breach or some firm that was breached. I know there was a couple law firms that was just recently breached too. And it was all because of these lists for passwords. And these all have an inherent value. And so typically what happens with those breach lists, why they're so valuable and why everybody wants them, is I can tell you from my standpoint, I love having these because I have essentially two 4 terabyte drives at home that are full with rainbow tables. So I know that doesn't really count with credential stuffing. So credential stuffing, the easiest way to disseminate between credential stuffing and credential cracking is when you get one of those breach dumps, you can safely assume that these are probably really good passwords and usernames, and you can more than likely try and recycle them against, bank sites, other sites that you want to pull money out of, sites that are rich with points. So think about in your life how many places that you have points that you get free stuff when you buy. You spend $20 and you get $2 in points. Or Best Buy, you spend $1,000, excuse me, I think you get like $50 or $100 back. So that all has a monetary value. Now, credential cracking is where, and again, it's super similar to credential stuffing, but credential cracking is essentially going at a login page with a guess. So it's either dictionary attacks. Rainbow tables are kind of the same, even though, once again, these are just other terminology. So what a rainbow table is, I know Ulta kind of went through Kali Linux, so I'll assume that you guys know what the RockU table is. There's tables built into Kali Linux that are actually what they call rainbow tables. They have a user set of a username and common, usernames and passwords already built in that you can use, or you can just straight up guess. And when we talk about guessing, this is where, like, if someone wanted to focus on a single person or a single user, this is where they would compile, like we talked about last week, with open source intelligence as much as they can, and then they would create a list through guessing or a best guess, because yeah, we have 80% of users that recycle passwords, but guess what else they do? They pull stuff in from their life to make their passwords because it makes it easy to remember. So they could talk about, if you have a daughter, your daughter's birthday, maybe their middle name, maybe a combination of those or some mishmash. And then you get into the last one, which is password spraying. This one is incredibly unique to me because I really didn't even understand password spraying until I got to Ulta and realized how often it occurs. That I can probably safely say, and Otha, you can stand here, and even Jason, you can probably attest this to a sequence, but I guarantee at any second in any given part of the day, there is some type of password spraying event that is going on in your guys' endpoints in some way, shape, or form. And all this is, it literally is what it sounds like. You're just trying to hit, you formed a list of some type of emails and you're just hitting them with passwords. So some common passwords that have gone around, like winter 2020, spring 2020, and then they'll add the pound or the bang sign, we call it, the exclamation point. So they'll just try and run through a whole bunch with one password. Now, all of this stuff, like I said, sounds more advanced than it is. These are still considered basic attacks. Now, the other thing you'll see with all this stuff too is retooling, which is what I like to, denote as rinse and repeat. And this is where when something doesn't work or it sort of works, and then, maybe we catch on and we block for an IP, all these bad guys know this stuff and they'll actually change up their tactics. Now, and we're going to get into kind of know your adversary in a couple slides too, but just know that they do this constantly. And the reason they do this is because when they get stopped doing it, because it's so worth the time to do it for them monetarily, they want to go back and they want to, re-get into that pool. They want to pull that stuff out. So there's a couple real advanced threats. I won't go a ton into them because if this, like I said, if this is brand new to you, these might be relatively difficult, or I should say more difficult to understand. So fake account creation, this is where someone might not leverage logging in necessarily, like we talked about credential stuffing, credential cracking, and password spraying. They're just creating a whole bunch of fake accounts. So a lot of times we see, especially in my industry, it's another form of almost reconnaissance, but also it allows account takeover to occur in a different fashion, meaning I can go out and I can create an account that says Nick Light and then just make up something. Then I can compromise an account that I know has points, and then I can merge the two together and say, hey, I got married, got a name change, boom, and you can merge the points. So fake account creation has a whole bunch of uses. They can use these to test the accounts, credit cards. They can also use it for a really simple, what we call a DDoS or a DOS attack. They're not very effective, in my opinion, anymore because of things like rate limiting, and we can get into that a little bit more if you want to see more of the e-com side too. True ATOs is exactly what I just described. So basically, they compromise the account. They use the account for as much as they can. I will also tell you too, right now, if you have paid with something online and saved your credit card, you should go back and remove it all right now as best as you can. So the reason we do this is because if they get into your account, they can easily change your address or the ship to address, and all your accounts or all your information is already saved. So they just need to pay, and then you guys are done. So that's just one form of what we call true ATO. Fraud mules, this is actually not a new concept. It's been out, for years. But this is where the bad guys put that extra bit of separation between them and the bad doings they've done. So what they do is they might have a more sophisticated infrastructure. And this is where you see more of that organized retail crime step in, where they actually hire people to go out to a store. They give them the account, they'll collect it in, and they'll just give them a cut off the top, or they'll allow them to buy product. So those people, they're still breaking the law. They might not understand it, and they might think they're just helping out, but they're really breaking the law. And then we'll get into this stuff too, like proxies, botnets, automation tools, and then some custom config files. This is all just the bigger picture of how to perform an actual ATO attack. So really, what's the point? And it always boils down to, I kind of alluded to it already, but it's the money. And the very interesting fact, and this is a current 2020 trend, is for every dollar lost, it equals to about $3.36 of expense to a retail company. And that might not look like a lot to you guys, but let's say you guys have points and you're an enterprise, and 1 point is $1, and you lost 1,000. So that company not only lost $1,000 there because they're giving back the loss to the customer, but they've also lost that extra $2,000 or $2,360 because operating costs, you get services, everything else. So this stuff is incredibly costly, and this is also why you see the sophistication from the threat actors, where they have automated tools, and it's not just where it was in the past, where I have my list, I go to the site and I just try and log in. We don't really see that anymore. It's almost always done through a bot attack. And then I won't spend a ton of time, obviously, because I don't know if this is part of your guys' enterprise. We can talk about this a little bit later, but we always see increases, especially off hours. The bad guys know when we sit in our chairs from 8 to 5 or from 9 to 4 or whatever it is. Also during special events. And the one thing I want to tell you guys too, I'm sure all of us wear shoes. I can safely say, or most people here would wear shoes, maybe sandals if you don't count them. I love sandals, by the way. If I can get away with wearing sandals all year round, I probably would. You can call me a freak in the winter, but I learned that if you are in a shoe business, meaning like Foot Locker or one of those, I can't think of another one off the top of my head, but I was actually told that almost every sale that they do when they do a sneaker release online is purchased by a bot. I'm going to pause here because that's huge. There's no human that can buy a sneaker during these sneaker launches. I was floored when I heard that. Granted, the space I live in, it's not quite there. I don't think anyone's going to rush and buy every piece of makeup out. I don't think it's that tight, but think about that. You can't even get sneakers because you're fighting the same bots that they use, and some of this stuff too. It is malicious, but they have what they call quote unquote good sneaker bots, which are still doing bot traffic. So it brings up, even if you're a defender on my side, how do we separate a good bot from a bad bot? They're using the same things. They're using all the same proxies, all the same tools. How do we defend against that? So it's another interesting thing to think about.
So just throw some color on that, Nick. There's a sneaker drop happening right now. I'm watching our Slack channel my name's Jason. I work at Sequence. I'm watching our Slack channel on the sneaker bots that are happening right now, and there's 75,000 requests for the same shoe that just hit this one retailer as soon as it dropped. So as soon as it went online 4 minutes ago, they got 75,000 requests for that shoe.
So think about what Jason just said. And I know I don't want to sidetrack too, because again, these go into more advanced stuff on e-com, but think about what that would do to the retailer. Think about what time it is right now. It's 9 o'clock at night, and they did a shoe launch at 9 o'clock at night. They're probably not doing this during the day because that amount of traffic to the site probably shuts the site down, and they can't have that. So this is where managing these bot tools and these bad actors is really where they come to. So I won't spend a ton of time on this slide either, but this is another interesting slide where it goes through what we call a monetization lifecycle. So it always starts with the original attacker, and they'll try, and this is pretty commonplace with just about every type of fraud you see, whether it's online, in a store, digital fraud. The attacker keeps it close to their vest. They want to get as much money out of the stuff that they have and as quickly as possible, so they don't bring attention to themselves. And then when they reached whatever they think is enough, or its stuff's not working, then they'll actually take all the stuff that they have after they breached it, and they'll start selling it. And they have a group, and a lot of this stuff, we kind of go down the line to the dark web, but the associates of these attackers, they typically don't know each other for the most part. Even if you're in a group of, and I'm using air quotes, you can't see, hackers, they really don't know each other usually in person. That's simply because they don't want people to be able to identify them. So a lot of these people are still, passing the buck down the road. And then when you get to the end, the end or the clear web, and I'm even talking about breach lists too. Like when you hear breach lists on news, it's usually months after the fact. I think the average time frame for a true breach, I believe, is still around the 3-month mark is really when they catch on. And that's a pretty damning, statistic, because how do us as defenders, how do we prevent against that? How do you really do a good job and thwart against those breaches? And that is a very, very difficult thing to struggle with and manage. And I can tell you, and I know I've said this even at Ulta, it's not a matter of if anymore. It is literally a matter of when. And that is another scary thing that you have to deal with too, being in a security role. So we talked a lot about this stuff. I kind of brought a little bit into it. So if you guys remember, I kind of talked a little bit about how sophisticated some of these actors are. Like, they're script kiddies. And I can guarantee you, this is what I was 6 years ago. I was that guy who saw a cool YouTube video, and I just basically took a script someone else had no idea how it worked, and most of the time struggled even to get it installed. But these are the people that are more opportunistic, meaning they watched that YouTube video and they found something on GitHub, and they're like, oh, I'm just going to run this. And by the way, I usually try and stop here. If you guys are playing with exploits online and you guys are working with exploits on YouTube, or you found one on a forum, be incredibly careful. So there was a study that was done, and I'll try and dig it up if somebody wants to see it. But the interesting fact is, most of these tools that you guys get offline, they are infected with rootkits, backdoors, malware. And I can tell you, like, the coolest tool on the planet, and you're just like, this is awesome, it's probably got malware in it. So once again, if you guys are in that realm and you play around, just be careful. I primarily stick to Kali Linux, or I completely segregate myself if and when I even bother to download one of those exploits or tools. So just be careful. But the script kiddies, like I said, low skill level, YouTube, or they might have had their friend who did the YouTube and they got shown how to do it. But it is really essentially like a plug and play environment. There's no development, no nothing. They literally take tools that people use, they dump stuff into it, and they get it to go. And another distinction with these script kiddies too, and this is where we can begin to start talking about proxies and their actual attack from IP addresses. Excuse me. There are some people that'll kick this off from their home IP, your WAN IP. So they expose their WAN IP to someone's site, which is super easy to find. Now, granted, I can tell you if you're probably looking at this, you're like, oh, I ran OpenBullet and I didn't know that. It's probably okay. I can tell you from my perspective, we're never going to hunt down these people unless you just keep poking the bear, and then we're going to go to law enforcement and flush the toilet on you. But the real reason I wanted to point this out is because the only type of sophistication they have is this proxy stuff. And I'll show you guys actually how to find these and use them too a little bit later. But these proxies are very low quality, and when they're free proxies, they don't last long or they don't stay up. I wanted to show this one too because I didn't go out and find more, and 200 of my 600 proxies were already dead. So when you look at that level and you step up kind of the people that are more of, you don't ever want to deal with these people face to face, that this is the organized retail crime space. This is a space that I can truly say I'm absolutely fascinated with. This is actually what made me really get into learning about ATO and all the stuff on the ecom side, because I dove in with my loss prevention departments and my ORC departments inside of Ulta, and we've been collaborating even from an IT perspective. Like I can tell you that from a threat intelligence side, I don't hear it very often that the threat intelligence side is embedded in LP or ORC, and this is 100% why I deal with this now, because these guys are very typically much more advanced or moderately advanced. They're not really opportunistic at this point anymore, unless it's something that's just like you've left a hole open, they're just driving a truck through it. But typically they'll do targeted things. And when I say targeted things, like for example, Jason brought up the footwear. They might not necessarily be doing something technically bad, right? They're just buying footwear. But what do they do with that product after the fact? So everybody wants that shoe. The shoe might have cost, $200 originally. They jack the price up to 400, 600, 800, whatever, and they control the flow. And they know this. So even though that's technically not illegal to do something like that, it's still not really right. Now, the other coin of that is them, flat out using, like we talked about with credential stuffing and credential cracking, they do that stuff as well. So they're more networked. They know how to get their money. And this is also the level where you see those fraud mules. So they know that they want to air gap themselves and they don't want to put themselves on the line. They will put other people on the line. And this is also where we see slight reverse engineering. And the reason I say reverse engineering is they're really not, most of these people in these groups, they really don't have the know-how to do the true development, but they will reverse engineer some of the tools to try and figure out how it works, and they'll make improvements or they'll change stuff out of it. So the sophistication level goes up in each one of these tiers. And then the last thing I'll tell you is this is where you really see what we call true dedicated and rotating proxies. And I'll show you how much some of this stuff costs too. It's amazing how much some of these good proxy paid infrastructures cost. And there's one that I want to point out too. And if you guys aren't familiar with this term, you can be the cool guy at work tomorrow and say you learned it, but bulletproof proxies. So a lot of my time, and 2 to 3 years ago when we first started working with Sequence, and even my ineptitude with some of these tools and understanding these very, very advanced concepts, we played the game of what I like to call whack-a-mole. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. You've been to Chuck E. Cheese, you take that big hammer and you whack that stupid squirrel, and then you end up busting your knuckles on something because you're so mad. It's pretty much how I felt when I started trying to do this with IPs and proxies, because it gets very defeating when you just try and hey, this IP is hitting us, so you just block it, and they just change to a different IP, and then you block it, and they change to a different IP, and you block it. They have figured out how to stop us from doing it. And it's literally, this is why we call them bulletproof proxies. So we talk about a proxy infrastructure, right? It's a service for sale that they give you a lump of stuff, servers in other countries that you bounce off of or you route through. Now they're purchasing residential IP space, and they're purchasing large chunks of cider blocks. So if you look at Comcast, there's probably a company somewhere that is brokering stuff inside of Comcast or WOW or 10 of the other ones that are out there in the world. And these are the ones that cost a lot of money because I can't block them typically. I don't know if, a computer in that network is infected or if it actually is, that type of infrastructure, because it's super hard to track those people down. And they are very careful. And when I say careful, this is where you see even more advanced or more sophistication too, because the people that are involved with organized retail crime, they are networked. They have people that do the attacks. They have people that are literally employed by those, Comcast, by WoW, and they work all together to compromise systems so they can use them for their own use.
They're also, just to add a little bit more into this, I dropped a couple of different proxy providers in the chat. They also use things like, if you use a free VPN, you are now a residential proxy node, right? And a lot of the free VPNs are like that. So you become this rotating node in this network that no one really can nail down because it's constantly changing. It makes our job really hard, but it's a really interesting aspect of you're providing a service to somebody that's then going to charge me $500 a month, right, to use.
No, that's a good point. That's an excellent point, man. And that, once again, that goes to say with the free stuff is usually not free. A good analogy I'll give you guys, if you're not paying for the service, guess what they're selling? They're selling you and your space. They're either selling your information or they're selling your connection. And then the last one all the way to the right is really that advanced guy. He's really the software developer. He's the one that, if you remember back in the monetization lifecycle, he's the original attacker. He's the guy that went out there, built the tool because he has a very, very deep understanding, and he's at an expert skill level to where he can penetrate and push through most things and develop those configuration files which run the tools. This is also the level where you see the tools, and they kind of go down in a reverse fashion, meaning, sometimes you might see where they come straight down from the hacker side, and the tools just get trickled down to organized retail crime, and then eventually they make it on the clear web, and then the script kiddies have at it when the tool is kind of stale or not working anymore. So they're like the cream of the crop, and they typically will almost always use those bulletproof proxies or incredibly expensive infrastructure because they don't want to get caught and they want to do their attacks really, really quick. And a lot of this time when we talk about retooling, I'll show you what this looks like on an actual on the console too, because retooling is actually very, very unique in itself too, because even though most of the time they do what they call low and slow attacks, it's where they might do like one IP every, 10 seconds and hide in the mass or hide in good traffic. But typically during retooling, you almost always see them mess up the script, and you see spikes. You'll see a spike once, and then 2 minutes later you see a spike because they didn't fix their script yet. So, and we'll go through some of that stuff as well. So we now talked about what ATO is. We talked a little bit about, who you're sitting across from or who you need to become to really take on defeating some of the stuff or start using their tools. The last part of this is actually how to go out and actually do reconnaissance on the things that they're using. And I purposely put BlackBullet in here because I want to talk a little bit about it too before we kind of really get into OpenBullet. But if you guys are not familiar, and I know, Otha, this is an awesome segue from last week. I know you went through some of this Google dorking stuff. This is an absolutely immense skill that you can do. And I can tell you that it might look super confusing. A lot of these terms like in-text, all-in-text, they look more complicated than they are. And what I would encourage you guys to do, and this is why I put the in-text and in-URL ones on here and all-in-text, and I got to go through here too. I don't know if you guys see that. Don't put a space between the colon, the quote. Something changed in Google. This used to work this way. I forgot that on the slide. I'll fix that too for you guys. But don't
still works that way on mobile though.
Oh, does it? You got to be kidding. It has to be that's a user agent thing then. It's got to be. I don't know. I was so angry one day. I was like, why is this not giving me any information? It's giving me wrong results. But to the point, you really don't need to be advanced or do even Google dorking. The reason why Google dorking is more important, it's really, this is a plain Jane, the one on top here is a plain Jane Google search. I said Ulta config BlackBullet, and boom, I got some information. This is probably, not, I know this one's dead because I've looked at this one. But this at one time was a working config. But the one thing I want to show you guys, so look at 33,000 results here. If you start applying some of these simple Google dorking techniques, like for example, all in text, Ulta config, look how many results I got. So I don't know about you, my time's really limited. I have a 9-year-old child that requests my attention at any given time. It's impossible to get an hour from her. And I can't go through 33,000 results. It's impossible. But I could probably get through 124. Or what I can do is even more refine what I'm asking for. So another good one too that I actually stole from Ulta, and I'll admit it, is the before and after tagging on there. I found that incredibly useful now using the before and after tags for years. It's actually streamlined even those searches more. So take that. I did OSINT for, last year and a half and got really good at doing it, really good in my opinion at doing it. And I learned something literally 2 weeks ago. So really the moral of the story here, never discount the things, even if you don't understand a lot of the stuff. I can tell you, I've been in your shoes if you don't even know what the heck I'm talking about here. It takes a lot to kind of dive in, and I would encourage you guys just to even go out and just try some of the stuff. I did include some of the hacking forums that are a little bit more fruitful too, as far as the configs, and we're going to get into the configs pretty much post-haste here, but I'll talk a little bit more about what a config is and how it actually works. But other places to look too, dark or deep web, I encourage, going into there. If you have not or do not understand the concept of true operational security, or what we call OPSEC, you should not be going into these places because you can expose yourself, your IP, who you are. I would encourage you. I'm even happy, we can do something to talk about the dark and deep web. I'm pretty proficient in it now, but I can help you guys out if you guys want to start looking at some of that stuff too. Reddit, Telegram, Discord. I included the bottom two here because these are, I wouldn't say more up and coming, but once again, when we talk about that far right person, that advanced threat actor, they don't really deal a lot in the clear web anymore because they don't want to be tracked. Discord, they can encrypt. They can delete all of the stuff that's in there, and they can get rid of that entire thing, and that's not saved. So they know this stuff. And even with Telegram, Telegram's encrypted now too. So it's very, very difficult to uncover someone because you can buy a burner phone and associate a Telegram account to it, and it's just backstopped. You can't get any more out of it. So that's kind of it with Google dorking. Now, I mean, this part we can kind of skip. This is more for, people that have been in there. What do we do to kind of turn the tables on these people? And it's use their own tools literally against them. Just like, Kali Linux. I want to use what the bad guys are using. So this is where that tool comes in with OpenBullet. And I can tell you, OpenBullet is going to look a lot more complex than it is. There's a lot of buttons, a lot of tabs. It is not terrible to go through. If you can load Kali Linux and you can go in and you play with the command prompt, you are more than capable of using this tool. So a little backstory. So I mentioned BlackBullet. BlackBullet is OpenBullet's father or mother, depending on what you want to call it. Doesn't matter. They're the older generation of their family. And before that, it was even another tool, which at the time was incredibly advanced, which was called Sentry MBA. And that one I know, Jason, I don't know if you were there in sequence, but I know that Will struggled with Sentry MBA for quite some time, simply because they used a pretty specific tactic. But again, this is the whole reason. And again, I keep saying config. We'll get to that too. I know I haven't defined it very well yet, but once they understood what makes that tool run, you can prevent it. You can attack the tools that are coming in. So OpenBullet is essentially a progression, and there's a few things I want to really pound home into everybody's head today. The first one is this is an incredibly sophisticated tool. There's so much stuff that has been dumped into here. It is actually literally an open source project. There's several forks off of GitHub now. They have a version called Anomaly, which is even just a slightly different variant. They use a different style of config file, but it is all from the same tool. It's all from BlackBullet. BlackBullet spawned all this. So this is community supported, and I showed, if you look at these two slides too, the one on the right is from GitHub. The one on top is from openbullet.io, and this is where they have forums. You can learn how to use it, general discussions. If you find problems with it, you can even ask how to use it. So not only, so if we talk about that script kiddie, where back in the past they relied on just grabbing a tool, now that script kiddie can step in a little bit more advanced because they can ask those questions of people that are willing to help you, or they simply have posted more information and they have a step-by-step guide that tells them how to commit fraud. So it becomes a little bit different. And BlackBullet was, I believe, created in 2018. OpenBullet, I think, showed up roughly around March 2019. That's kind of when it went, wide in GitHub. And I do want to point out that OpenBullet, it is a fraud tool. I want to be very clear with it. It is a penetration testing tool that hits web applications, but it is absolutely billed and touted as a web testing platform, which is phenomenally crazy in my opinion. So now we talk about its sophistication. and it has a community backing, it's not going anywhere. And this is where we now talk about why it's worth looking at tools like this that the threat actors are using, because it pays dividends on the back end for you to learn these things and learn what they're doing so you can defend against them. So I know I kind of promised you along config files. They're literally called config in quotes, right? It stands for configuration files. These are literally just simply what makes the tool run. So if you think about having like a website, it's what the code, the underlying code that shows you the website. That's literally what a config file is. So it pretty much just tells the tool what to do. And the very interesting thing about these config files, they're infinitely configurable and customizable. So once again, we have sophistication and customization. And then there's also stuff built into this tool for evasion. So I don't know about you guys. Are you guys familiar with Recaptcha? It's that stupid, annoying box that pops up and says you got to put a check mark. Or my super favorite ones that I absolutely want to throw something in my screen is where they have you look for a truck, and then like it's partly on there and you can't see it, or you got to. Or my favorite one now is the find the traffic lights, and if you don't select the pole on the side, you're wrong. I don't understand how half this stuff works, but the reason I point this out is they actually have something built in that defeats this stuff. And you can literally go, once again, to a paid service for better, what they call Recaptcha solvers, but they do have free ones out there. You can literally go out and get a free Recaptcha bypass that has already been solved for the site that you're hitting.
So the Google Captcha is my favorite whenever I run into any of the Google Captcha, because there's an API call you can make to get the solve.
Oh.
You don't have to do anything. You just request it.
Yep. So again, this goes to the sophistication piece. So it allows you to do those bypasses. You can use Selenium drivers. You can use JavaScript to actually inject more code. And this is the thing that absolutely baffles me is you can now actually mimic what a human actually does. So when we talk about this stuff, the reason why we bring this stuff up is because Recaptcha is not a good way of defense anymore. Rate limiting. I talked about how I played whack-a-mole with IPs. I could rate limit someone on an IP and just let them hit once every 10 minutes. It's still not good practice because it doesn't really defend. It just obfuscates. So at this point, now we're dealing with this tool that is so advanced that you have to kind of fight and defend against it. So there's a few things to this ATO attack too. And the reason I point this out is because this is directly correlative to what OpenBullet does. So it all starts really with those credentials. And we talked about the credential stuffing, credential cracking, password spraying. So you need some type of credential list. And realistically, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to find these. It's not impossible. Don't break the law. That's my disclaimer. That's all on you guys if you break the law. Don't say Nick trained you how to do this. But also the tools. Obviously, we're going to be using OpenBullet tonight. The infrastructure behind, which would basically be those proxy lists, and we're going to use some free ones tonight. And then the behavior. So we can actually incorporate, and again, I don't know the education level here, but when I say user agent or user agent string, those are the different types of browsers that might be used, like a mobile UA. UA stands for user agent. That is a totally different fingerprint than Chrome 82, Chrome 83, even Chromium is completely different, or Safari, or Internet Explorer. They all have a different type of behavior, and they use this stuff because they want to rotate through as much as they can so they don't get caught. And that's really where OpenBullet steps in. I'm going to pause real quick here. Do you guys have questions at all? Anybody have any questions?
So you spoke about getting open source tools or tools off the web. What's your thought process regarding just analyzing things you find on the web via the GitHub or other forums and things like that to use like any particular tips you would advise to vet stuff?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. There's not really a great way is what I'll tell you. So a lot of how do I answer this right? So there is ways to vet and see what happens. And I can tell you that it really boils down to doing reverse engineering and forensics. And this is a very wide topic. So I kind of give you a few examples. For example, there's malware out there that knows it's in a sandbox. So like any of the typical tools like Hybrid Falcon or Hybrid Analysis, URL scan, some of those, any run, they actually know they're being sandboxed and they won't trigger a fire until it actually hits a true endpoint that is not virtualized. So to answer your question, there are ways that you can be relatively certain, but it's really my opinion that whoever's writing this stuff, if they really wanted to write something that is going to fool absolutely everyone, that can happen. But again, that's tinfoil hat time, right? So we all know that I started with Backtrack, which was Kali Linux before it was called Kali Linux. Who knows what was put into Backtrack, because it was community supported at one point before it went mainstream. So to answer your point, what I would probably use, now I can say that I've used open source tools. I use GitHub a lot. GitHub is relatively safe. They have a lot of good practices on the GitHub side. Plus, it's something that's used in the community and very, very specifically in the security community. So typically, when stuff makes it on there, it really doesn't last that long, from what I've seen. But again, once again, think like a threat actor. If you want to infect people and you want to trick people, and you come up with this somewhat creative tool that might even not work, and you just want to pass malware, just understand that there is that possibility. So I would encourage you to get not even AV endpoint detection. I would encourage you to get a separate computer. You can go to Craigslist or wherever else, just buy a second computer that you don't care about. And then what I would probably tell you to do is figure out some way to read the traffic that's on that computer, or even check, registry is another good one. That's another one that's pretty easy if you use Windows. Linux and Mac are a little harder to do forensic stuff if you're not familiar with the operating system really well. But I can tell you Windows is a pretty easy one. There's tons and tons of information for forensics on Windows, but that is something you can do. The last thing I can tell you to do, you can take that file. I'll throw some of the stuff in chat too. Hybrid Analysis is free. They do free malware detonation. VirusTotal is another really great one. And the reason I point these out is because we all have fingerprints on our hands. So does malware. And I know malware is classified. And again, we can have a whole separate talk on static and dynamic analysis of malware and how that works. But if you just think about it in terms of a fingerprint, it always comes down to some type of hash. So for example, I can take, you guys can all see this on here. I could download the code on here and whatever this repository is, and I can throw the zip file into VirusTotal and say, hey, there's been no hits on here, which relatively means it's probably safe. Then I can open up the file right on my safe computer and then look at VirusTotal again and start going through the files. That's usually the way that I do it. But again, there's still inherent danger. I'm not saying that everything you guys find for open source that you can pull down will inherently be bad. There are some even hackers that I know that will develop and do stuff and just pass it out because they don't like the fact that things are hidden from people. So, weigh your pros and cons. If you're on a hacker forum in the dark web, I would probably assume there's going to be some malware in there. Or if you're working with a developer and they're building something for you, and you're paying for it, probably not going to be a ton in there. But the simple bottom line is just be careful. I know it's a roundabout way to say that. Hopefully I answered your question.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else?
So understanding that you have to be careful in terms of what you download, even when you put it on a separate machine that's not like a home machine, how are you masking your internet? You said you have to be careful with what you got on the internet for when you're downloading. How are you
good.
Your internet aspect?
Yep, that's another good question. So there's a few different ways. You can use some of those free VPNs. You can use Tor. I highly encourage that everyone on this call should try and get some type of VPN service. Typically go with a paid service. They're a little bit safer because they're maintained by an enterprise. Myself, I use Nord. I've used, IPVanish in the past. It's just Nord was so ridiculously cheap, and it seems to do its job. I've ran traces on it too, but what I'll usually do is I'll do Nord and then I'll hop on Tor. So I'm actually double VPN. So a lot of the stuff I do, but again, you got to be kind of careful with that too. If you're doing it at your home, because there's certain sites that will block you because they can read the IP address range for all of Nord and all of IPVanish. And I assume even out of Tor, even though some of those endpoints rotate. Typically, if you're really going to go the best way, you should use someone else's network that is not even tied to you at all. And I don't mean to break into your neighbor's network and compromise their network, I'm more talking about go and use open free Wi-Fi. Like go to your Starbucks, go buy a coffee, chill, download it, and see what it does. That's typically the safest thing. The only alternative on that one that I can offer, or a third version, is get a MiFi that is not associated to you. You can buy a burner MiFi. Just put some credits on there. You don't have to associate a name. It just does its thing through cell. And then when it runs out, you can throw it in the garbage or renew it on another one. I've done that in the past too. Good questions.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna hop into here because I see we're at 9:30 and I don't want to keep you guys over. So OpenBullet's on the right-hand side, and I know I'm skipping the installation and all that stuff. I will spend some other time if you guys are interested to kind of do it. There's tons and tons of tutorials, which is why I really didn't choose to go through it, because I felt you guys would look at me and be like, Nick, this is boring. But there is literally the instructions right here. And I promise you, and I made the mistake too. I was like, I don't understand how to install this. Read each line. I'm telling you, it works. It definitely works. These instructions work. The biggest thing that you'll mess up on, or I should say that I messed up on, was when you do the Visual Studio to build the solution, it gives you an option to build just OpenBullet or build the entire package. Just select build the entire package. I think the solution and package terminology changed. Other than that, you can pretty much use it out of the box, with the exception of how you set up your not your config file, your word list file. So, for example, my word list file, I have it set up in so this is just how I set up my word list. I just chose to do username : password. There is a config file inside of OpenBullet, and again, you don't need to pay attention. Just know that there's one there. That's the biggest thing I'll tell you. But just know that there's a config file that you potentially have to modify to actually do the configuration. I'm gonna have to remember what that is. I'll find it for you guys before we leave, and I'll let you know where it is. I always forget where it is. It's the one thing I always forget is that stupid file. But yeah, I mean, there's that would be the only one gotcha I can tell you as far as running this tool, or at least the one that kind of got me. One of the word lists I used was in a really, really bad format, and I couldn't figure out why nothing was working. But so everybody always starts here, right? This is a GitHub clear web page. Literally go to code, download the zip file, and then follow the instructions that are literally right here. So I know we talked a lot about proxies, word lists, and configs, and this is where this tool sophistication and even the raw complexity that you can add in is absolutely phenomenal. So, and I know we talked about Recaptcha bypasses. Where's the config files not on here? We looked at how to find the config files through using Google Dorking. So we're going to pretend like we just downloaded one from Node, and that's actually the config file that we have loaded in here. This one is what we call a test or demo. So this one is actually loaded to an endpoint that Sequence was nice enough to allow me to have access to. So this is what they call an eMadison Island. It's just a dummy endpoint that you can hit or play with. So this config file, and again, if you take one thing away, you don't have to understand what all these buttons and boxes are, the data, there's a lot to go through here. The biggest thing I want to tell you is you can load a config file, right? I showed you guys in here. Here's the configs where you load them. This is just a config that I, pretended that I downloaded that I'm using. And all I'm doing is I'm adding word lists and proxies. So right now I'm pretending like I'm at script kidding. I just downloaded OpenBullet. I either downloaded a config for free or I paid for one because I wanted one that worked, whatever, 5, 10, 25 bucks. A lot of these configs, you'd be very surprised too. They're as cheap as $2. I haven't really seen them cheaper than $2. I would say on average they're 10 to 20. And the most expensive one I think is in the hundreds. I would say more averages around the 20 and 25 area for the good ones that have been, recycled down the path from being used by the original owner. But the biggest thing I want to show you here, and this is kind of that Recaptcha bypass. Now their particular endpoint, eMadison Island, they don't have a Recaptcha to my knowledge, but you can literally add, and this is where I wanted to really point out this tool. So we're in the config file right now. We can actually put in some of that expert functionality, bypassing stuff. We can put in a solved CAPTCHA, and then how Jason pointed out before, you can simply go on the internet and find these pre-solved keys, or you can go to some type of service. And I believe this is the one I just picked. This is anti-captcha. I did not log into this because I'm going to blow this thing away when I'm done. I have an account that I use for work. But this is one way to kind of get some of these CAPTCHA solving services. Now, when we come to Ulta, we don't use CAPTCHAs. We just never have. I don't know if we ever will. And I think this is part of the reason why, is because it's just one more step that really, it's not great. I like to call it security by obscurity. So if you want to look at these, they're out there. Anti-CAPTCHA is a good one. There's one other webpage, which the names, I can't remember the name. I'll get it to you guys. But that's one other step in this config file you can potentially add. So Proxies is another interesting one. So we talk about proxies. Again, if you guys are not familiar with the word proxies, it's just basically someone else's internet that you're just borrowing. So when you set this tool to go through, to go through it when it runs its dirty business, it's just using these other IP addresses to hit that endpoint and then report back to the tool. And literally, you can go on the internet, and this is one of my favorite ones because it actually houses some pretty good free proxy lists. So you can literally go here even tonight, download free proxy lists. I would probably tell you, if you're going to start playing with this tool, go in there once a night and download all 3. You can dump all the socks, like you'll see socks 4, HTTP, which are the regular, the simpler proxies. I don't know if I have socks 5 in here. I think all those died. Those get killed pretty quick. But dump it as much as you can. And this actually has a testing function, so I can go through and check. Like if I wanted to check this list right now, it'll actually run through. And I know I only put this on one bot, so it's going to take a while to get through 600. But it's testing all of these right now. Like we're at 619. I'm just going to abort it because I know these half work. Like see, there's not working ones already. And that's from 2 weeks ago. So they do go up and down. You have to kind of maintain these. And then you can actually remove, if you wanted to remove the, not working ones, you can just eliminate them from your list. So proxies, free. I know we talked about those free, or I should say not the free, but what we consider premium proxies. This is actually pretty inexpensive for a halfway decent proxy provider. 40,000 proxies that are guaranteed to work, $375 a month. That is literally a drop in the bucket. I have seen proxy lists for advanced infrastructure, and when we say advanced, remember that that infrastructure, that bulletproof infrastructure that you can't really defend against. Those are in the tens of thousands, if not even close to the hundreds of thousands. So the reason why those go up is because they work and they can't be blocked. So that's where they get even more money from them. And then the last thing, obviously, you need is the word list. This is just a word list that I literally scraped. I did use some data from the internet, but this was just a simple Pastebin search that I literally said combo list. And this was the first one I found on Pastebin. So for example, if you wanted to find one yourself, you can do in text, combo list, and then in URL, pastebin.com, and it'll just give you combo lists. So this is where you can start building your your list yourself. Now, here's what I'll say. This is where it borders on my morality. I don't ever keep real people's information. I am more concerned with the passwords, and that's usually what I play with. So I never retain the usernames. Whatever you guys feel comfortable with, I'll challenge you guys on that. That's really up to you. But just know that you can pull lists out pretty simply. So once again, you need a proxy infrastructure, you need a word list, and some type of working config. Once you get all those, basically plugged into there, this tool is set and ready to go. So you would go to what's called the runner tab. And then what you literally do is you start going through this infrastructure. So these are dummy ones that I got that I know are just dead ends. They will not work. And they also, just to be perfectly aware too, we are not hitting an actual endpoint that somebody, owns or belongs or that is worthwhile. We're hitting something that Sequence owns. So just know that if you do use this tool and you start hitting sites, you are now stepping into the illegal side. So just be cautious. These are active use tools by hackers. So just be cautious. So when we go and actually kick this off, and I'll talk about what this is too in 1 second, but what I want you to notice right now is there's nothing in here. So this site is not really getting attacked at all. So if we go and start, we run this attack. So right now I have 200 bots. You can actually go down to 200. We're just going to use the most that we can, and we're going to run our attack. So you guys remember when I talked about retooling? So, and this is not all the time. Like we talked about that advanced, that hacker that does this stuff, but this is not common for them. The only time we see these kind of spikes for these attacks is when their script goes bad or something they forgot to configure. I mean, they're human. I can't tell you how many times I've kicked off a script and I go, holy crap, that's not going to go the way, and I need to stop it immediately, and then it causes me to do some remediation or cleanup. It's the same thing on their end too. They're just as prone to development issues too. So the reason I show this is because this one is definitely, very well pronounced. This is absolutely an attack. And the reason why we can say this is an attack, the way that sequence works, scroll over this way, but you can see legitimate traffic and attack traffic. This is one reason why I absolutely love their tool. It's because it just works, and you can make things very, very simple. So when we look at this attack, and again, we're getting into very, very complex topics in the e-com and e-commerce world. So I'm only going to brush on some of this stuff. So if this doesn't make sense, I'll kind of step back and try and explain it another way too. I was there too. I didn't understand this tool at all when I got handed it. It's deep. So when we talk about things like this spike, and we talk about OpenBullet, OpenBullet exhibits a specific type of fingerprint. And when we say fingerprint, remember how we talked about, hey, I'm that attacker, I'm that dumb kid, a script kiddie. I just use that one IP address and I keep hammering away. That would cause the same red line on here too. But that's a real easy attack to find because all of my attack traffic for hundreds of thousands of accounts are coming from the same IP. You can automatically assume that that is someone bad doing something horrible. Now, what stands this tool apart is really the fact of we loaded proxies in here. I have 600 and something proxy IPs that I can now do a singular attack, or I can do 10 attacks, or I can do 200 attacks. I can choose that. So I have 600 IPs, and let's say I do 200 attacks on each IP. That's a lot of attacks. But guess what? I can blend into all of the traffic, and it makes it really hard to find and to combat. Now, that's where we start talking about, we go away from that whack-a-mole. In the past, when I worked at Ulta and we started out 2 to 3 years ago, you play this horrible game of what we call geofencing. And geofencing is where, hey, we're getting attacked from Iran, we're getting attacked from Russia or China or somewhere else. And I go, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to block it all. We shouldn't be selling to people in those. We should only be selling in the US. And I can tell you that day when we eliminated all the traffic and we saw no attacks on our site for 4 or 5 hours, it was a big win. But what ended up happening? The attackers retooled, they started testing, and then guess what? They found out that we left the US open. So what did they go out and do? They found new proxies that were only in the US. They found the one hole in our whole armor, and then metaphorically drove a truck straight through it. So those attacks started, straight up again. And that's why this tool in particular makes it so difficult as a defender, or what you call it, like the blue team, if you guys want to relate a blue team and red team. But when you're defending this stuff, it makes it particularly hard. Now, tools like Sequence, there's other bot tools out there. I've looked at them. I can tell you that the reason why I really like seeing Sequence, and not that I'm trying to sell you guys anything on here, I just want you to understand the landscape I deal with, is because they look at what we call a fingerprint. I talked about it already. You guys have 5 fingerprints on both your hands, and hopefully you're not missing fingers. I hope you're not missing fingers, but everything has a fingerprint when we talk about it. So if you lo and behold, hey, this one shows up as OpenBullet because it got tagged before in the fingerprint, or its behavior and not the IP, not the user agent that it used, not the organization, which is the proxy or IP list it went through, but it got tagged and it got blocked because of its behavior. So as a defender here, using this tool to kind of, penetration test infrastructure, it makes sense on my end because I can now start using the tools that the bad guys are using and the configs they have. And I can say, hey, this config's going for $100 online. It doesn't do anything to our website. I don't care. Or we can go, holy crap, this config is bad. I don't even understand how it pokes through our holes. And then once again, we'll go back and look at this. Like all of these are not being identified as OpenBullet right now. These are just different fingerprints. But again, they're using the same tool. So you can kind of backtrack into this stuff and kind of go, well, if we assume they're using bot tools and everything else, what's the common denominator? So we start looking at different types of attack patterns and fingerprints. You can really break it down. Like, this is something that Will, he's on the Sequence side. He spends a lot of time with me showing me tips and tricks, but see how this is all, and look at how even this is spread. Or this one. or this, spread out. It's almost evenly spread out. Like you don't see this in normal traffic. You don't see typical distributions when you have e-commerce traffic. It's almost never equal. Like you don't see 100 from here and 100 from here and 100 from here. And this is where that behavior and fingerprinting comes in. And when we start looking really what it's doing, and I understand that this probably makes no sense. This took me a long time to understand too. But when it triggers on here, this is actually rules or policies that we put in place that cause triggering on that behavior. So like, for example, non-US origin, 122 are blocked immediately just from this policy. So if you look up on here, hey, we have repeated login attempts in 1 hour, that's rate limiting, right? So behavior again. So we're now blocking and taking care of those things that we dealt with in the past. Like if you guys are familiar with what a WAF is, or a web application firewall, that was like the #1 tool back in the day. I'm sure Oath is probably smiling or thinking funny in his back end. He's probably reliving his heydays in there, but that was their primary tool. They would rate limit and they would play that game of whack-a-mole and just keep, destroying the IPs as they came in. Now we have tools that are way more advanced that can learn off of behavior. And it goes back to this tool because I'm sure there's a tool out there, because guess what? I can tell you that every day we get attacks at our edge. I can tell you Otha probably does, Jason probably does with his company, maybe even more so with his company, because they try and defend against this. So I can imagine that those attackers would really want to, drop them out of the race. So this is why we use tools like this, and they make it really, really easy to kind of learn what they're doing and defend against. So I won't spend too much time here because, again, if you guys aren't familiar with this tool, it does take some time to dive in here to go through. But if we kind of sneak over and we can look at our attack here, my mouse will work or not work. So this was actually our attack that we just did. This was our attack in the last 15 minutes. I know it doesn't look like that pretty spike. This is because it's stretched out over 15 minutes rather than maybe we look at the hour. So there's our spike. But if we let more time go along and we look at the day or the week, 2 weeks, you can see these spikes. So typically what you'll see, like if you look at a month, this is what you see as an attack pattern. You'll see spikes on here. This is indicative of what we talked about for those script kiddies or that ORC, the organized retail crime groups, is they try and hit the stuff fast and quick, and if it doesn't work, they just move on to the next company. They want to find a company that doesn't have security. They want to find someone that they can compromise very quickly and very fast. And the other thing I want to show you, so this is one that I did 2 weeks ago. I didn't change my proxy list, but look how many less in 2 weeks that have dropped off. And even from the attack I ran earlier today, it looks like even more proxies might have come back up. There's a couple more spikes up. So this is why we use these types of tools. So if you guys have, I don't know what spaces you guys work in, if you guys want to chat about that really quick, we can. But there's lots and lots of use to finding those tools that attackers are using. So I don't want to spend too much time on here too, but this is what Sequence does for us. So not only do we discover those attacks and we, whether it's hitting an endpoint, our API logins, our login pages on, any one of our given web pages, we can look at gift card or credit card enumeration now too, which is another thing that we deal with in the space for e-commerce. So that tool allows me to test a whole wide range of things that the bad guys I know are going to do. And then the most important thing is it can not only detect, but it detects and then defends against it. And that's pretty much what they do for us there. Now, lessons learned, and again, this is more aimed at the practitioner that deals in the space, but always get involved with this stuff. And if you guys are looking at this like, holy cow, this is the coolest thing since, sliced bread, take this back to your companies and ask those teams if you have the relationships. You don't necessarily have to be in the security team. If you're sitting in this group, I can tell you you're probably incredibly interested in security, or you're trying to get some skills up to make a move. The #1 thing I've learned, look at my background 5 years ago. Someone sitting in my seat, like the average person I talk to, Jason, I know you've been in this business for a while, 20 years typically is someone sitting in my seat. And they typically have gone through the military. They've been trained to do the job that I'm doing. I learned, I call it the hard knocks life. Like I've learned everything wrong to do. And that's how I now kind of understand what right to do. But take all this stuff back to your company, because if you guys are looking to make that move or make that shift, I know Otha is really big, and I absolutely enjoyed watching him go through, looking at your resumes. These are things you can do inside your company. If you like your company now, you don't necessarily have to make a jump or a move. Start bringing them some of this stuff and saying, hey, this is kind of cool. Did you guys know about this? Because you'll be surprised. I've given this talk to companies that are, Fortune 500 or Fortune 100, and they look at me and they go, I didn't even know about that. And I deal with e-com every single day, and I don't even know what a bot tool is. So yeah, can I have that number? So bring that stuff back to you guys. But the biggest thing I can tell you, and I'm a really big proponent of this, if there's questions, I can tell you that if I can, I know we're over in time too, so I apologize too, but if there's ever questions that you guys have, there's really no dumb question. I have sat in front of people, like I said, way smarter than me, and I'm sure I've made a total ass out of myself out of things that I've asked. And I can tell you that I would not be here today if I did not ask those questions. And now I flip it around. I am more than happy to train people. I will never consider myself an expert. And I know everyone tells me to stop saying that because I have a lot of knowledge, but the problem with me is I never feel like I'll ever know enough. And I really do pay it forward. So if you guys have questions or something like that too, feel free to reach out. But the biggest thing is share the stuff that you guys know. And that goes with your enterprises too. Never hoard knowledge. I can tell you that I can't tell you how many people I've watched, even inside of the organization that I am at, for people that tried to protect the stuff that they knew, and it didn't do anything but harm them. So share as much as you can. Share the tools, share your knowledge. But I'll kind of open it up now. If you guys have any questions? I know we went through a lot and I'm over in time. I apologize if you guys got to run. I totally get it.
And I'll look at the chat to see if there's anything.
And one more selfish plug too. Like I said, I'm not paid by Sequence. I don't work for them. If you want to learn more, if you guys do work in the space, the similar space that I do, and you want to learn about bot defense, they have a really, really unique tool. And again, it's going to sound like a sales pitch from my point. I don't want to do that, but check them out. And then I would also encourage you to check out the other people in the space. There's a few other ones. Jason's probably going to punch me in the face when I say this, but go look at Shape. Go look at one of those other large bot tools, and I can tell you that fingerprint and behavioral heuristics is really what the next wave of dealing with these threat actors are. There's no other defense at this point.
No, I've been in the space so long that I don't care what product you have. You got to get something in front of your. Please shut these idiots down. And if you need a Captcha solution, you go look at Arcos Labs. I'm happy to say that. Right? There's plenty of places where you can get a lot of help with this stuff. I dropped my LinkedIn in the chat. If you don't want to reach out to a sales guy, my title is hacker in residence. All I do is break stuff. If you want to talk to me about our solution, I'm happy to talk.
So someone asked, what is your Slack channel? I guess that was to Nick or Jason.
All my stuff is internal. It's our customers, how our customers talk to us. So if they say, hey, there's a shoe drop coming or something, that's how they talk to us.
Yeah, same with me. I mean, I'm on Discord. I could probably get you into Discord. So yeah, I'll share my Discord. I'm going to tell you, I'm not great at going onto Discord. There's a couple other organizations that I volunteer that's what they use because again, some of Discord is actually encrypted and we can throw the talks away. If you guys want to learn more about that, I can talk about that too. I'm part of Operation Safe Escape. So we help protect people that are in need. And it's something that, again, like I said, I know I pay it forward and I sound like a broken record at this point, but I really do try and pay it forward because I would not be sitting here even talking to a group like you guys or talking in the RHISAC or even have the ability to talk with someone as knowledgeable as Jason or one of the other Sequence folks to give talks. Like it's an absolute honor to be able to do that people want to listen to me talk.
So someone in the chat also gave another example of a pay spin for Disney Plus to give you an idea of it. So that's in the chat as well.
So that's I dropped that in there. Disney Plus went online in November. In February, this dropped on there. You can see all the accounts started in December, though. This is just an example, right?
Yeah.
What the link at the top is how you can buy the real list. This is just the, teaser list, I guess.
Right. So somebody buy it and just give it to me. So I don't want to download it. So
To be
one
clear,
thing
that is illegal. Don't use other people's accounts.
right. So when he was talking about ATO and account takeover, I did a quick search on Indeed account takeover just to show kind of jobs that are out there. A lot of stuff dealing with fraud and threat intelligence analysts, just to kind of show you how to frame your mental reference from a job perspective and to find other skill sets that are needed for account takeover. But this was the original Attacking and Defending Active Directory Beginners Edition. Okay, so for those individuals that were interested in the Active Directory class that we did, so this is the traditional Red Pen Tester Academy class, and it's pretty thorough. But if you were overwhelmed with so much information and want to do a beginner's class, then definitely 4 live sessions. So something to think about and add to your tool belt. And like I said, I don't really endorse a lot of people, and I guess this is not an official endorsement. I'm just into finding cheap, affordable training, and I don't mind sharing that with you guys. And this is something that I'll probably end up taking. All right, so definitely appreciate Jason for providing the environment, and definitely for Nick. And I will go to Ulta Beauty's website, but you guys know what Ulta Beauty is. But definitely appreciate Nick for taking the time for sharing his information. And this is, like I say, the month of Nick. So we'll see him in 2 weeks again. Pull up his website as well. So definitely see you in 2 weeks, next Tuesday, same time, same bat channel.